Well, welcome back. We are here to make plum jam now. So this is a wild plum jam that I make for berries and flour. Your plum jam should turn out about this color. One of the wonderful things about plum jam is that it's sweet, but also very tart, and it just is full of flavor and complexities. So we're going to work with the plums that you got in your kits today, or whichever plums that you have from the store or have picked from outside. The first thing we need to do is think about pitting the plums. If your plums are fresh, it's really easy to just slide a knife right across them. You would take the plum and twist it, and sometimes you can get the plum right off and then just pop the pit out. That's the easiest way to pit plums, especially the small ones. But if you have frozen plums or plums that took some time in the freezer or in the refrigerator or something else, it's easy to get the pits out in another way. You can use a potato masher. This is a pastry blender, but we can use that too, and just smash them. The skins will break and the pits will come out. And then you need some kind of strainer. If you use a regular strainer, the plum pit is just the same size as all the skins and that sort of thing. So you can use something like this. This is my plum strainer. It's a thing from IKEA that has nice big holes in it that will allow the plum skin pieces to come right through and all the flesh, but the holes are big enough to allow that, but not too big to allow those big plum pits to come out. So I'll just pour this in there, set it over a bowl, and let the plum goodness come out. So that's how I get rid of the pits. You can also follow the recipe and just boil the plums for a little while. The pits will release from the flesh, and then you can pour that whole thing through something like this. Or you can just go through and pick the plum pits out. It's big for a regular, so that's one of the downsides of using plums, but they're so good that it's completely worth the effort. So fortunately, if you got the kit, you have already pitted plums, and we can just use these halves and make the jam in a very short period of time. The other thing you need to think about is what kind of pectin you're going to use. So pectin is a material that helps to gel the jam. You can make jam without pectin, but it's a lot faster and more consistent in your product if you do use pectin. You have a low sugar pectin in your kits, but you can use regular sugar pectin as well, anything at the grocery store, or you can find a lot of different pectins online or different stores. So if you do a different kind of pectin, you need to pay attention to the recipes that come inside the boxes, because the amount of sugar to fruit and pectin is really important. You won't get gelling if you just throw a bunch of stuff together and put in a box of pectin. So you do really have to pay attention to ratios of the ingredients. So we're going to follow, the other thing for prepping is to think about what you're going to do with your jam. If you are just going to put it in a container and put it in the refrigerator, that's fine. You don't need to think about sterilization of your jars or the lids. You can, if you have canning jars, what you want to do to sterilize is thoroughly wash them and then put them in an oven, hot oven, for at least 10 minutes on 250 degrees. That will sterilize the jars. And then you leave them upside down until you're ready to turn them over and put the jam in them. I've also used a dishwasher on high temperature, and you just wash the jars, leave them in there, and then use them when they come out. You can also use like a chlorine solution. There are a whole bunch of different chemicals that you could use to just wipe the inside of the jar, similar to brewing or anything like that. But you do want to have sanitized jars. The other thing to deal with the lids. So there are a bunch of different lids for canning. These are probably the most common things, where they're in two parts. You have an inner ring that has some kind of plastisol or something like that that's on the outside. This will make a tight seal with the edge of the jar. And then you have a ring to help push that plastisol down on the seal. The other kinds of things are a single piece. This has the same type of plastisol inside, and then that will seal on. One of the things with jam when you're trying to do sterilization is that you need a vacuum to form. So you don't want to fill up the jar all the way to the top. You need a little bit of space. So in your recipes, it will tell you to leave a 1/4 inch space or 1/2 inch space. When this is really hot, it will pull the air out and then make a vacuum on the inside, and that helps to keep the product sterile too. So you'll need to have some kind of lid. Again, if you're just going to put it in you could put it in a Tupperware container, glass container in the refrigerator, but you will want some kind of lid to keep it tight. The other thing you'll want to do, and I did this already, I put a little bit of water in this pan and boiled those lids, the separate lids, and that helps to make the plastisol a little tiny bit squishy, but it also helps to sterilize those lids. So those are all ready to go too. All right, I did once, I'll tell you, leave the plastisol lids in for the water for about 1/2 hour and all the plastisol boiled off. So you need to be careful with your lids. So the other thing you need is sugar. So if you look at your recipes in your kits or the recipe that came with the class, this is a recipe for a full batch of plum jam. This is based on 1 box of pectin, but for your kits, we halved the recipe. So you get 1/2 a box of pectin as well as 1/2 of the ingredients that are here. So if you follow this recipe again, you're gonna get double the amount of product that you have. All right, so we are going to start. I'm gonna turn the stove on. And something that's like medium high is good for this. You'll first start off with your plums. And again, we don't have to pit them or do anything with them. You want all that good juice in there. So we can just pour that entire bag of plums right into our pot. And then we need to add a 1/2 cup of water. So again, the recipe says a cup, but we just want a 1/2 cup because we're just making part of it. Another thing that you want is a tablespoon of lemon juice. So I'm going to go ahead and use the rest of my lemon for my tort and probably another 1/2. And I can guesstimate a tablespoon. So you might want to measure it. And if you don't have a whole fresh lemon, you can use bottled lemon juice for any of these recipes. It's a decent substitute. Another thing you can do is freeze lemon juice. So if you get a bunch of lemons, you can just freeze them in ice cube trays, and then you have little lemon juice tablespoons that you can use at any time. The next thing that we want to do is mix our sugar with our pectin. If you just dump the pectin in, it tends to clump and it makes little gummy bear kinds of things, and that's not very tasty. It's got a weird texture and is not very appetizing. So you'll want to get a bowl and take about a 1/4 teaspoon of your, 1/4 cup of your sugar out of the container. I'm just going to do this here. And you'll open up your box of pectin, or they have a little cup of pectin, right? Oh, they do have the whole package? Okay. And so we'll take about 1/2 of this and sprinkle it over the sugar. If you have a scale at home, you could put a whole package of pectin on your scale and then measure out 1/2 of it. That's the most accurate way to do that. Then you're going to mix up that sugar and pectin. All this does is distribute the pectin a little bit better. So then when you put it into the liquid, it doesn't make those big clumps. And then just sprinkle that mixture on top of your fruit. So my fruit is already boiling. So you do want it to come to a nice boil. And you'll mix up that pectin and sugar mixture. And as the plums boil, they'll start to disintegrate, and that's good. You want there to be little tiny plum pieces all through your jam. And this is actually technically jam. Jam has the fruit pieces in it. Jelly is just when you're using the fruit juice and you don't have pulp or pieces of fruit in it. All right. So as this boils, you want to kind of smash the plums up. And I'm going to use the pastry. Just be careful not to burn yourself. Ooh, like that. But sometimes I even take one of the, like a stir mixer that you would use to blend soups, or a blender, and really mix it up if I want it to be firmer. But having nice big, I love big chunks of things in my jam and stuff, so. Okay. So it should come to a boil. We had pureed plums first or anything like that, you wouldn't have to break it up. So think about the consistency of the jam that you want before you cook. Then you also wouldn't have to do this when it's boiling. Sure, you can hear that. It's boiling pretty hard. If you can see. All right. So this step doesn't matter so much that the pectin boils, but once you add the sugar, you want to time the pectin boiling just to give a good sense of how the pectin is coming together and congealing. Smells so good. You'll probably notice it's an ugly brown color right now. Often when you cook fruits, they're going to oxidize a little bit and turn brown. But then when you add the sugar back in and the lemon juice, sometimes that makes the color go back to something beautiful and appetizing. Often colors in plants are changed by their pH. So things that are yellow might turn green, or things that are purple might turn blue. All right. So what you're looking for with your plums, are that the flesh looks cooked. So here I have the plums are kind of breaking up and there's a clearness to the plum flesh. It's less opaque. And when it's looking like it's nice and cooked, and then it has the chunkiness that you want in your jam, you can add the sugar. It also needs to be boiling at a rapid boil. So a rapid boil is when you can't stop it from boiling by stirring. So sometimes you'll stir and then the boiling goes away and it'll come back when you take your spoon out. When you're boiling, a rapid boil is like you're stirring and it's still boiling all around your spoon. All right, so this looks pretty ready. The sugar in your kit has a bigger granule to it, so it'll probably take a little bit more time to cook. But you'll notice when you dump this sugar in, that's room temperature, it will cause the boiling to go away almost immediately. And that's totally normal. So I'm going to put the sugar in and just stir it up. You really want to keep stirring this because this is, you work at fairly high temperatures, but it will burn on the bottom if you don't keep it in movement and keep it stirring. That also helps to distribute the pectin, the sugar, whatever other ingredients that are in there. And I think this particular stove is going to start boiling right away. So I'm going to mix this up some more. So I think I'll turn it down just a tiny bit. So most pectins are going to tell you how much time to wait after the sugar. They say it's very important to wait exactly 1 minute, exactly 60 seconds, exactly 3 minutes, however long it takes. So my mother taught me a little trick of making jam with pectin. And when you lift your spoon out, it should have 2 drops that come down at the same time. You see how that's making kind of a sheet? So that's nice and gelled already. But you want this to come to a rapid boil, and then just keep lifting this spoon out. And when 2 drops come down at the same time, it's ready. Another trick that you can use is to keep a spoon in the freezer, a metal spoon, and then you can drip some jam on the back of the spoon. It will cool really fast and you can tell what consistency it is. But that consistency, you really want the setting and that gelling of jam. And you can use that too if you do jam without pectin. You just cook it for a really long time. And then when it has that gelling moment, then you put it in jars. So I'm gonna let this come back to a rapid boil, and then I'm going to count. This particular pectin, yeah, it says stir vigorously for 1 to 2 minutes to dissolve the pectin. But I think it is important to make sure you look at each different kind of pectin that you're using. If you're having trouble getting it to gel, then you can follow the instructions on your Pomona box, make the calcium water, and add some to that remembering that we gave you half the ingredients too. All right, so this is starting to boil, but it's not a rapid boil yet. So when I stir, it's distributing the temperature and the temperature is going down. So this is boiling sugar. It's very, very hot. So you are going to want a hot pad to hold your jars. And usually I use some kind of measuring cup that's made of Pyrex or something like that, and I dip it in and just pour it right into the jar. You might also use a funnel, to put on the top of the jar and then pour the jam, boiling jam in there. But you do want it to be nice and hot. There's 2 drops coming off right at the same time. So I'm going to turn off my stove. And I didn't get anything to do this with, so I'm just going to use this bowl, and I'm going to use the funnel too. And I'm just going to pour the jam right in there. So remember, you don't want to overflow it, and you want to keep at least a 1/4 inch from the top. Now we are going to use a clean towel. You use a clean towel with just water or a paper towel with just water, and you want to wipe the edge of the jar. This is important because you're going to get all of the jam that might have spilled on the top, any water, anything that's on the top of this off. So when you put your plastisol liner on there, it can make a tight seal. So then I'm going to take these, put the plastisol liner on top, and I'm going to use one of my rings and tighten that down. You just want it to be hand tight. You don't need to crank down on it. And then you're going to flip it over. So flipping it over helps to heat the lid on the bottom and heat that plastisol liner. And that also helps to make that vacuum. I'll leave it here for about 10 minutes and then flip it back over so the jam will fall to the bottom. I've sometimes left it like this, for an hour or so. And as it cools, it gels here and then it won't go back down into the bottom of the jar. So it looks like it's empty. So we're just going to do that with each of our jars. And I think this should make about 6 jars of jam. These are half pints. Here's another one. I just put, oops, I forgot to clean the edge. And you do want to clean the edge even if there's no jam on it. It just is a good practice to be in. And again, finger tight. Flip it over. There is some discussion in the canning world of whether or not you leave those metal rings on the jars. I don't leave the rings on. Once you make that vacuum seal, you are pretty good. You don't have to do anything else. So the ring is only there to hold that middle ring or the middle seal on. So I'm gonna wipe my lids. Put another liner. All right, there we go. I probably have 2 more jars that I could fill, so I would have 5 half pints out of the recipe that we used today. No, if you put the jar upside down, this is enough sterilization. And the product is already boiling, so you've brought it to a temperature that is going to kill any microorganisms in there that would cause disease. So this is an acceptable method in canning stuff. And I am certified by Better Process School, so that's something that we learned about in terms of canning. If you just took plums, like if I just left this here and I put it in jars, then I would definitely need to use a water bath to can it. I would let it cool to room temperature and then put the lid on. Otherwise, you're going to get that vacuum forming, and that could deform your lid, deform your container, etc. And that also pulls things, from the container. If you're using plastic, it could break the container. So I would say so a plum is what we call a drupe fruit, and so it has a single pit in it, and all of the drupes are somewhat related to each other in terms of botany. But if you want to substitute any drupe in here, so anything that has a single pit, like a peach or an apricot, that would just absolutely work. An apple, it depends on what kind of apple you use. So some apples are really firm and they're not going to be juicy enough to sink down in there and make that plum, chewiness. But some apples will do that. Apples tend to be more like applesauce when you cook them down though. And so I'm not sure that it would absorb enough of, like the flour would absorb enough of that juice to really make that goo layer. So I would probably avoid something like an apple in this. I don't know. That's a good question. I would say probably at least 3 weeks. The sugar content is going to keep the bacteria from growing in it, but it is in the refrigerator exposed. So you could have potential to get mold and bacterial growth on it. So I would say 3 weeks is probably a nice, risk-free, safe margin.